Hello, and welcome to Getting Real with Paula. My name is Paula Alphonse, and our guest tonight is none other than Linda Ferguson from NLP Canada Training. I consider Linda to be the NLP guru. The way she embodies neurolinguistic programming in her heart, in her soul, and with her whole being is like I've never seen before. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about her. I'm going to let her introduce herself, and we're starting the conversation now. So good evening, Linda.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to talking to you and to your people.
Thank you. So can I ask you to introduce yourself, a bit of what you do, how long you've been doing it, and why not, how did you even get started into neurolinguistic programming?
I got started like most people do. I read some books and I tried some stuff, and that's the easy answer. The harder answer, the truthful answer, is two parts. One, I was ghostwriting articles on NLP for a sales guy, and he fascinated me because he could really quickly decode what was going on in our conversations, but also because he'd start talking and the voice in my head would go really quiet. And I'm somebody who talks in my head all of the time. And so for it to be so quiet, I was curious about that. And that was kind of the good part. The other side of the story, which Paula doesn't even know, is that I had gone through a series of 4 miscarriages, each one kind of worse than the last. And so I was dealing with a lot of aftermath. And one of the things I did, I went to the doctor and asked for a referral to somebody counselor, and that was just another doctor. It didn't really help. But I read Tony Robbins' book, and I started trying the exercises, and they helped me kind of get hold of me at a difficult time. So I was a little bit hooked on learning more. When my contract ended and I was looking for something new, a man, Chris Keeler, who at that time owned NLP Canada Training, and I connected over some sales training that was supposed to happen, and 9/11 happened. And we both sent out prayers, and these 2 emails kind of crossed and got us into the same kind of headspace. And so he invited me out to one evening of NLP, and that was in 2002. And within a year, I was working with him, and he left 10 years ago, and I'm still here. So really, I got into NLP because I needed to be resilient, because I had things I wanted to do, and I wasn't feeling great about doing them.
Wow. I love it. And I feel sad as well because you know, miscarriage are never easy things to do. And to go through four of them and at a young age feels as though, okay, I have to figure out my path forward. So, yes, that's the good part for me because NLP has this way of helping you reconnect with yourself and figure out what the next steps will be. But instead of telling people what I think it is, I'm going to ask you, for those that are not familiar with NLP, can you give us a sense of what it is and what it is not?
Lots of people are curious about how they work and how people work, and they go and they take courses or they read books in psychology, and it never kind of fits with, but what do I do right now? What do I do in a conversation? So NLP is kind of that missing link between great information about how people work, but turning it into something that actually changes the way you think, the way you feel, and the way that gets communicated in the world. So it stands for neurolinguistic programming. It's a terrible name. It was the 70s. They made it up and then it stuck, but it didn't really. That's why everybody calls it NLP. It's not really about programming, but it is about conditioning. I love that word training because for me, I started out coaching as a soccer coach, and it's that repetition of doing the right things until they become automatic and you can kind of lean into all that practice and trust it. And so NLP, simple techniques practiced over and over so you can lean in, and they're aligned with the best current information, the way I teach them, the best current information about how people work. Some people will teach everything that has ever been tried in NLP. I think that's a mistake. It's a really new field. It's still only 50 or 60 years old. It wouldn't be very innovative if they hadn't done anything wrong, if they never tried something that didn't work. So I don't think it's a cut on the field to say some of the stuff that they guessed about just doesn't make sense. It was 40 years ago. We know a lot more about how people work. But the core techniques and tools, they're techniques and tools. They get you hands-on with information so you can do something useful. And useful is kind of my favorite word.
Yes, yes, because at this point, especially through the pandemic, we want something useful. We want to figure out the path forward. Just so we get it off the table, what is it not? Because it's been used to all kinds of things. So we just want to clarify for those people who don't really know, but I've heard things here and there. What is it not?
What it's not, it's that you can use a knife in the kitchen to prepare dinner, or it could be a weapon. So you can observe people more carefully so that you can identify their strengths, you can find common ground, you can collaborate better. But that same careful observation can be used to undermine people.
Yeah.
The strength of NLP is that it really works best when people are what we call congruent, all of one piece. And aside from a few people, there are a few psychopaths out there, and they really don't care about hurting people, and they can use the techniques to get what they want. That's true. Most people aren't as effective if they're doing something exploitive. And the most famous kind of where this all started was a book called The Game, and it was about pickup artists using NLP. And what I thought was most fabulous about it was that because they weren't all of one piece in what they were doing, because it wasn't in tune with really being fully human, they kind of disintegrated. And the story wasn't really about how these people were super successful picking up women. It was about the price they paid for that success. And I think that's true. So that's why when I teach it, I teach people to get their best out of themselves. They have to understand who they are and the kind of world they want to be in and work in keeping with that. And I also think you can't let all the best tools go to the bad guys.
Yeah, totally agree on that. So can you give some examples of things individual can use NLP for? How can they apply it, and what would be some of the benefits they would observe?
So last night we did a program on managing resistance. And the theme of the program was that resistance is only a problem because we kind of feel like we've hit a wall and we act as if we've hit a wall. But people aren't walls. And if we notice that feeling and instead of giving up, say, wait, do I still want the same thing? I do? Okay. I have to learn about what's going on over there. And then I'll just solve the problem and find another route. And so we did some work to help people access that strategy. So they practiced it, so it'd be more likely that they'd apply it. And then today, when I had to talk to my husband, who's invited my family, extended family, 10 of us, here for my birthday, and he's going to run it, only he's never done that before. And I was like, So I was like, last night, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to imagine a walk through it. And this morning it was kind of a non-event. I was like, okay, we could order this and this, and you could do that. And this is how it'll be easy. And he was like, yeah, okay. The surprise for me was later this afternoon when there was a project in the yard that's been waiting for years. Mm-hmm. And it was a little tenser conversation. But then darned if he didn't go start on the project. Mm. So when you are able to check in with where you're at, and then say, who do I want to be and how do I want to move forward here? That's hard. That takes practice. It's not a natural thing. The natural thing is that direct route from brain to mouth where you just say whatever comes in. But when you start interrupting that and saying, wait a minute, what do I want? How am I going to get there from here? It doesn't matter if it's at home or in the boardroom. It's going to make it better. And what people most tell me they use is that ability to interrupt their own responses and make choices instead. And
I love it.
It's hard, people have because we teach it this way in the post-secondary system. I've been teaching in post-secondary for many years. And we teach communication separate from self-awareness. And it's a lie because the way human beings are built, most of what we communicate is what's going on in us. And a tiny little bit are the words that we use. And you can't separate the two. So when people come to me and they're like, I just want to sell more. I'm like, great. You have to be more self-aware. When you're self-aware, you can build your awareness of other people. And then you can move towards your goals. But like the top salesperson that I've coached went on not just to sell, but to work on a bigger dream. And the thing I love most now is when I look at his social media, he's got so many things he's engaged in, like things that he loves doing. You could call them hobbies, but you could call them passions. And he has gone from having a business goal to having life goals, building all of it together. And I think all of us have that option. We can decide to focus on just one thing, or we can decide that the whole thing is what we're working on.
Sorry, I just love it. I just love it. You and your magic, you take the conversation where I'm not even expecting it to go. So that's great. For the people in the audience, what I want you to remember, there's two questions Linda's mentioned. What do I want? And how do I get there? And I would say without hesitation that if in more of our conversation, we would stop to ask ourselves that question before responding, before even approaching someone, then right there, it might help us close some of the loops where you turn around and you say, oh, well, that wasn't what I wanted. And you realize I wasn't even paying attention to the other person. So,
and with a lot of the people who are close to us, family and work people, we get into kind of patterns and they have a function, but they stop us from asking, wait a minute, do I want to have this
Mhm.
argument again? And how did I come
Familiar.
to I love you so much? And I ended up saying, I love you so much, but.
Yeah.
And so just, it's a microsecond. It's not knowing what you want in the big picture, not having goals. That's important too. But it's at this very moment as we're engaging. What do I want this moment to mean for you and for me, for the people watching? And knowing where we are in space, in time, with a want. And I think that gets left out of a lot of the books because people focus on these, I want to build the $2 million business, or I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Owning $1 million house just means owning a house now, but it used to be, people would have those kind of goals. And I think there's a good place for those, but I think you build it up one success at a time, and the successes come from, and sometimes the successes come from saying, what do I want now? Oh, it's not that anymore.
Because we're allowed to change our minds.
And because as we get more information, that's called learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people who get too hung up on always having what they want and holding it for too long, sometimes it's like, oh no, I can give in on that one. Dealing with kids, parents all the time, really, could be 35-year-olds, but 5-year-olds too. It's like, wait, do I need to be the one who wins this one? Or is there, something else going on here? And so picking your battles is what it used to be called.
Yeah. And I love it because I started doing a bit of NLP years ago, and I still remember my kids when they reach their 15, 16-year-old, and they would turn to me with questions. And as they're asking the questions, they're expecting me to answer the questions. And I had gotten to a point in my journey where I've given you all you needed in order to make decisions and have a sense of where it is and what it is that you wanted to do. So rather than answer, I would I would respond with a question and ask them to, start thinking it through. And I remember one day one of my daughters saying, you know what? When I ask you a question, I just want you to give me an answer. And I'm like,
yep, that's what you want.
But my answer might not be yours. So what's more important is which answer do you need? And it might not come from me. And they were in the beginning, it was not an easy process. They're much better at it. And sometimes they're just gonna say a simple yes and no will do. And I would say, for me, it's no. And then you decide what it is for you. But it's the change of the pattern. Because as you say, being a parent, there comes a point where you can no longer tell another human being to do or not do. You can only wait for them to figure out what that step is, because otherwise you'll find yourself in confrontations all the time. Anyway.
So one of the he's kind of a founding father. He didn't found NLP, but Milton Erickson was a famous psychiatrist. He was a hypnotherapist. He did use hypnosis in psychiatry, but he also wrote lots of medical papers on the use of it. And they studied him when they were developing NLP. And Erickson believed 100% everybody has within them what they need to live a more satisfying life. Not a life that satisfies other people. That was a little bit of a catch. But it means that when you're a parent with your kids, you can say, okay, they do have it. Not because I was such a great parent, because some days we don't feel that way, but because everybody has it there. And our role as influencers is just to help people make that connection.
Yeah. And I like the use of the term influencers, because oftentimes we make the mistakes as parents are wanting to still control the outcome, where it's no longer our life. It's no longer for us to, we've done the protective, we've given you the guidelines, we've given you those values for you to guide your path, and then that's for you to follow.
Yeah. Even when
Somewhat.
they're little.
Yeah.
I mean, I coached a woman once who was having trouble getting her, I think he was 7 at the time, her 7-year-old out the door to school in the morning, which is a pretty common stress point.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the answer had been, have you tried asking him nicely? You know, she
I
tried
can
asking
only
him
imagine
nicely,
the side.
and he went out the door. After a while, she decided she just didn't feel like using her willpower to be nicer than she felt like. So she yelled at him again, but because people get to keep making their own choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was that, you know, just have you got that moment of connection? Now I teach people, if people aren't listening, don't give them new information. You have to make the connection before you have a channel to communicate. But after teaching communication in schools, that almost never comes up. And in fact, in the textbook we use in business communication at the college where I teach, it's like create buffers between you and your, I was like, you don't need a buffer from your reader. You need a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And what you need to be doing is making a connection. It's not just come up with something that sounds good, but it's really think about that other person for a moment and notice if they're paying attention to you. Because when you have attention, people understand you whether or not you pick the right words. And when you don't have attention, they don't understand you no matter how clear you were. So under all of it, you know, you can improve, you can learn techniques, you can learn, you know, how to structure a business letter or something in a way that's sort of useful. But underneath it all, I think we need to be better at being aware of what human beings are and how they process information and respect that. Because when you respect the way your computer works better. When you respect the way your toaster works better.
It seems so simple when you say it like that, and often when you look at conflicting situation where there people are having confrontations, and it's truly that I want you to do something according to my way, and the other person are thinking I'm going to do it my way, and that's what it is. We're not connecting. We're not paying attention to one another. So therefore, I don't even understand why it's important to you, and whether your outcome is actually a challenge to mine. Because sometimes it's not. Once we understood and we figure out the path forward.
We're honest about home lives. We've been part of at least one conversation where we were arguing and we both wanted to do the same thing. And you think, how could that happen? That is so illogical. And it's because what we wanted was to do the same thing, but together. And we weren't paying attention to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the human brain, not the personality, this isn't about being needy, this isn't about your background, but the brain is really hyper aware of other people and the people that are around us that are in closer proximity or that are around us more often. We're built to be hyper aware. They become links in our neurology. I don't understand that part, but there are social neuropsychologists who do understand. It's not a made up thing. And it means that we're always paying attention on some level to other people and what they're paying attention to, so we can predict what's going to happen next, because human beings are the biggest factor in what happens next for most of us, moment to moment, day to day. And so when your brain can't predict because people are deliberately withdrawing attention or off in their own space, and nobody can actually read minds. You feel like you're reading minds when you're reading your own mind because you're in connection with somebody. You can read behaviors, but you can't read minds. And so your brain says, high alert, we don't know what's going to happen here. That takes energy, and that neurological energy shows up in our feelings.
Sorry.
This is really uncomfortable, right? Because we want to be able to predict what happens next. It's not even about control. What we control is us, but we can't have any control without prediction.
And control is big for most people, at
and
least most adults, if not children. Yeah,
and organizations.
as well,
I'm
as well.
finally getting around to a book I've been trying to get to since last fall. It's a business thinker I really admire. Her name's Margaret Heffernan, and the book is called Uncharted. And
Mm-hmm.
it's about the difficulties organizations have when none of all the management techniques work because the world isn't predictable.
Yep, pandemic,
But,
big ones.
this is where I like that NLP allows us to bring together science and the arts
Mm-hmm.
because they're not coming together enough. And people who are used to science, even behavioral science, they're always like, we should be able to predict. It's very weird that things are ambiguous. What is that VOCA? Volatile,
Mm-hmm.
unpredictable,
Uncertain, on the uncertain. Yeah, okay.
complex, and ambiguous. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, welcome to the world of the arts. Because in the world of the arts, that's where we've been playing for as long as there have been people. And we really need both kinds of thinking to get us through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I have a PhD in poetry. So that means I am analytical.
That transition is easier for you than I would say for most.
Yeah, I'm still trying to persuade people that reading novels is a really important thing to do if you want to get better at making predictions about people. So,
Yeah.
but
I don't know whether our predictions are ever, because I find that in a lot of situations, your prediction say mostly things about you than it says about the other party.
That's
And
the
that's
discipline of the NLP, right? That's why we need these little techniques, because naturally we project, naturally we do confirmation bias. And the only way to balance that out is to develop a habit of being skeptical about our own thoughts. My newsletter this week said, don't believe everything you think.
yes.
And so now this isn't the whole world of NLP. This is NLP Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because not everybody who's in the world of NLP has spent a lot of time understanding the foundation, understanding what's underneath the techniques and why they work, or trying to understand what's going on in the rest of the world in thinking about how people work and matching those things up. And I really believe that you need that foundation in principle and in understanding how what you're teaching fits what they're going to hear other places. So I try and read kind of most of the current, latest, greatest books on decision making and choices and what makes people happy and how they change, and a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not like doing a degree in just one thing, because I really believe what we need is all of that to make good choices. And the people that come and study with me are doing all of that. Some of them are trying to, I have one client who heads an insurance company. He's got different kinds of issues in some ways. In other ways, he's not in Canada, but he's also not in his birth country. So he's communicating across cultures, and then I'm coaching from a different place again, trying to help him navigate. And you might say, well, shouldn't he get somebody from that culture to navigate? But no, you need bridge builders. And so, yeah, I'd be happy to be thought of as a bridge builder to help people bridge the gap between what's driving them, but outside their awareness and their conscious mind and their conscious thinking. And then when they start building that bridge, they're much better able to build bridges with other people, but also with situations and organizations.
I love the portion about the bridge builders, because I don't think any societal, or if we can call it, challenges can be addressed until we start learning how to build those bridges between perspectives, between cultures, between upbringing, everything, or even between the various sectors of industry. So all of that, as you say, because we each come into a conversation from where we have been. And in that conversation, we sometimes or most of the time engage with the other person, not understanding where their journey has started and where they are at that moment. So it's, yeah, attention, attention, attention. We go right back to this.
And the quality movement. I almost, before I got into NLP, was involved with some, do you remember quality assurance people and the quality movement?
Yeah.
You don't have time to do it right the first time. You probably don't have time to fix it. That's still embedded in me for when people say, I don't have time to set a goal with my team. I don't have time to figure out how we're going to do it before we start. It's like, wow.
You're going to pay the price.
Is going to take longer.
Yeah. And we always feel like we're, at least in a lot of organization, it's always rush, 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 rush to do something, but we haven't thought the plan out long or at large. And you find yourself doing something, and then a few weeks, few months, it's completely gone, have no idea what we were doing it and whatever came out of it. And then we keep running. So that is not making a corporation or an organization better. That is not using your employees to their best potential.
And I will say this for NLP, because I don't do a lot of corporate work, but I worked with a team one day, and it turned out the client's boss was part of the group. And I didn't really know that until partway through the session came out. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And we were doing that standard visioning, goal setting, how are we going to meet these targets thing? The targets are too high, blah, blah, blah. But we came out of it with some positives, and the room covered with flip chart sheets. And then the boss said, you know, we do this all the time, but this time these words really seem to mean something. And obviously they'd done it in exactly the same amount of time with me as they'd done it before, because it was like a standard, we need to do this team day kind of. So it doesn't take longer. It feels like it's going to, because you invest more time up front in forming the connection, but then you spend so much less time untangling things later, that there is time. But it involves, when you hit that resistance, when you hit that first thing that maybe you're resisting, that your gut response becomes, right, where do I want to be? What do I want? How am I going to learn? What do I need to know that I don't know about what just happened? And then going into it and problem solving. Because if you problem solve at the level of the words are never going to work for you. But if you have a connection, language is amazing. All of them. Both languages.
To me, it goes back to relationship building. And that's building understanding so that we're actually speaking the same language. So anyway, longer term story. It doesn't happen if you don't put in the effort. I know last year you came out with a book, Resilience, Growing Stronger. Yes. In times of crisis. This to me was so very timely with respect to the pandemic. And I'm not going to say that knowing you, it's not something that you just did for that.
Well, it kind of is. So it's published by Changemaker Books. Yes. The publisher at Changemaker Books is an NLP Canada Training practitioner. And we were on Facebook, I guess, just at the end of March last year, like just as we were starting, and everybody, he's in the States. They seemed more panicked about it, more surprised, so more panicked. And he was like, I've decided we need to publish this run of 10 different books. It ended up being, do you want to pitch? And I was thinking, opportunity might not be easy to come by. I'm not going to say no. So I was already transitioning NLP Canada over to Zoom
Mm-hmm.
and transitioning a college teaching load over in April. And I said, sure, I can write a book in 2 weeks. So I pitched the book, it got accepted, and then we had about 2.5 weeks to write the book. Why I wanted to write it, and I had to really fight for the Grow Stronger title, because everybody else handling anxiety, handling, whatever problem kind of stuff. And I was like, the only good answer is to keep growing.
Mm-hmm.
That when you hit a big problem and you want to be the person other people depend on, and that's who I was writing it for, all the people that weren't going to have time to go get help because they were busy being the rock for somebody else, that your response has to be, how am I going to grow in this situation? How am I going to develop my strength? Because if you're just trying to maintain or hang in, you know what happens if you hang too long, you drop. So I really wanted to do that. And I also really wanted for people to start understanding what they would be missing in a virtual world. Because we understand other people as doing something for us. But we really underestimate how much other people are mirrors, and they tell us things about ourselves that we can't get at any other way. And so in a way, I felt like people as I was never a believer in the 2-week lockdown. When they locked down our building, he said, I'm asking people to, stop things for 2 weeks. And I said, well, I've canceled things till the end of May. So we'll see after that. By then it was, so I was already thinking it's going to be a long crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people to know they're going to feel weird. Excuse me, those allergies. And they're going to feel weird because behind the scenes, their brain is usually processing all this interaction with other people that tells them something about what's going on in them, in the same way that a mirror shows you your face. Now, we get to spend more time in front of mirrors than ever before because this is really a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only one mirror, and we're only seeing ourselves through our own eyes. And when we're interacting with people, they say weird things, and we go, oh, that's weird. Oh, why is it weird? Okay, what does that connect to for me? Mm-hmm. Opens up our own thinking. And so it's really important to me to reach out with the message that this is going to be happening, be aware of it, and so be a little more active in seeking connection, because you're going to need it to stay balanced in yourself. Which, remember Tom Hanks in that movie Castaway talking to his ball? Yeah, it didn't really come out how much lack there is. That it's not just in having external conversations so you find out about something out there that you're missing, but that kind of who we are is our web of connections. Mm-hmm. That's an idea NLP doesn't have, but gives you really good tools for exploring. And so most of the time where I'm playing, so I'm not exactly mainstream for the NLP world because I don't want to be. What I want to be is also that kind of bridge that says, okay, this idea, how do we turn that into something we can do? And then NLP will usually give me an answer for that.
Told you she was special. Every single thing she says feels like breathing and talking in NLP. But I also know, and I'm saying but, it's not but, it's and. I also know that you're using storytelling for a lot of your practice, but also in your personal life. Can you tell me, or can you share, what are some of the connections you observe through storytelling and the result it brings?
So to me, two things are necessary for a story. One is you need some sensory experience being described. So it doesn't happen off in the abstract. It happens somewhere, and people are feeling things and doing things and seeing things. And you get that stuff happening so that the listener can trigger the same feelings inside themselves that the the teller is bringing up. So you get two people in sync because we sync up with other people through our senses. That's what we share as reality. And there has to be something happening to make it a story. I have met some people who think you can have stories where nothing happens. No, that's literature. You can do a poem where nothing happens, and there's a valid for that. But for stories, things happen, which means people have to adapt and change within the story, and the reader has to adapt and change listening to the story because they think it's going to do one thing and then it does another thing. And so more than anything else, I think stories allow us to live through change together. And that's not always our experience of change in our lives, right? You can feel like you're changing, the people around you aren't, don't understand. Maybe your family doesn't understand what's happening at work. Maybe at work, people are doing different things and they're not really paying attention. So we're changing alone a lot. But in a story, we change together. And that gives us this incredibly useful way of sharing information. When I tell a story to a class of grown-ups or 100 kids, doesn't matter, it gets really quiet because they're listening. But they're not listening to me. They're listening to the story because I'm in the story with them. And we go through this story, and it can be a little story about something that happened in real life. It could be a big story. But I'll tell you, even 20 years ago, I was telling stories to kids about dragons and wizards. And they would have so many feelings that at the end they would say, is that true? Now, these are kids, even 20 years ago, they're listening to the news. They're exposed to all of this. They know that there is not a dragon at the zoo. They're not thinking that. But the story got into them so much, it feels like truth. And I would just say, that is truly the way I learned the story. I wasn't there. It happened a long time ago. And the kids would go, oh, okay. Because you don't want to tell anybody a story isn't true. All stories are true. They're truly your experience of change and change in response to events. So to me, they're much more complicated and rich than when people talk about giving an analysis, because kind of by definition, you analyze one component at a time. But in a story, you get the relationships, the patterns changing through time. So back to VUCA, back to volatile and complex. But it comes out in the way that you could talk to I got to read a story to my 20-month-old grandson the other day. And it was about a turtle going to a party. And the weirdest thing for him was the party. He's never been to a party. He's 2. He's not even 2. His whole life has been in COVID times. There are no parties for kids, right? But he was there because he could feel it was Hurry Up, Franklin. It is a good book. It goes back a long ways. That turtle trying to get distracted, but come back on course, but get distracted and making it just in time. See, you're cheering for him too. And I'm just retelling the barest smidgen of this story.
And yeah, I just remember the stories because in my my family we read a lot, and we started reading when we were really young, and there's always been a book that the children would go back to, and as you're telling the stories, there's all layers of information. There's reinforcement of some values. There are ways for the child to see how does that apply to you. So for me, storytelling is huge. And if you look to our culture, which is our culture, the Aboriginal culture, as well as the African culture, a lot of teaching, learning is done through storytelling. We didn't have TVs, and we didn't rely on those mediums to actually understand things, or computers. And I feel it's sad that in some ways we're no longer using, I mean, we're no longer, as a society, modern society is not.
It's hard for parents. It is hard to fit in that kind of culture in 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, which is the only time you have off when you are not running kids' places, getting to school, doing this, doing that. I am fortunate I get to make some time for kids because I work weekends. I can sneak some time off during a school day. This week I'm starting a run of 3 story sessions with some grade 4s. And I'm going to give them a really beautiful, complicated story from the west coast of Canada, from the Indigenous peoples. I'm not sure which tribe it is. I have to look it up. But it's about bears and respect. And a princess is kidnapped and married to a bear. It's a Beauty and a Beast story. But it plays out really differently. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to tell them Cupid and Psyche from ancient Greece, which is also about a princess who ends up married to somebody who might be a monster and turns out to be a god. And how she is able to kind of make her way to a happy ending, whereas the princess in the other story gets a sad ending. Deservedly, sort of. You still feel sad for her, but it was her choices coming to play. Mm-hmm. I think showing the kids that all of those stories are kind of equally complicated and rich does a lot for helping them be open later to understanding people from all different cultures. And as long as I've told stories with children, I've been aware of telling from all over the world and making sure every kid could see themselves represented in the stories some of the time. Although, to be fair, I didn't actually tell very many stories about blonde princesses at all. That's probably my most least.
That's because they were too mainstream.
Because they don't. There are a few of them, but mostly the blondes aren't the interesting ones. I don't know why. It's partly because of where the stories come from, even in Eastern Europe. I love Russian fairy tales, but there aren't a lot of famous Russian blonde princesses. So you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then mostly I don't let kids know so that they can be whoever they want to be in the story.
In that story, yeah.
And that happens the same way in an NLP class with grown-ups. The surprise for me when I was starting out in NLP was I told some fairy tales. And the adults like them more than the kids, if anything. They were like, oh, no, tell us a story. And it turned out because NLP is kind of out there, right? People like to feel like they're doing something a little risky, a little creative by coming to an NLP class. So they'll listen to a story and then they go, oh, no, that's really good. Because they let go of that, but I have to immediately see where this is going. Mm-hmm. And where it's going right now is if you want to know how we're going to get out of the mess we're in, whatever mess you want to pick. You can pick the racism mess. You can pick the environment mess. You can pick the economic mess. There are so many. You want to look to stories of how poor people have done it. Because rich people, they got nothing. They have always had all of the resources they need. So they literally don't have experience of what to do when they don't have all the resources they need. But all the folk and fairy tales in the world are about people who didn't have everything they needed, figuring it out. Yeah. And I think if there's kind of hope going forward, and I believe there's lots of it, that's where it's coming from.
And I think what you're saying, at least what I'm hearing, it's about opening our minds to possibilities from a perspective of the unknown rather than the perspective we have to apply what has always worked. Because as you say, the current reality and most of the messes we're in, it's because what has been tried and true does not apply in those situations. So if I haven't learned to stretch my perspective outside of those beaten path, then I can't figure out which way to go, and I'm kind of stuck.
And you have to be able to hold an outcome when you don't see logical support for it. And my favorite stories to tell the kids were always the ones that messed up all the rules. All the Jack stories, like Jack and the Beanstalk, but he's kind of the ickiest one. Now, Tijan stories from Quebec, they're so much fun. He's a Jack, so he's foolish. He makes a lot of bad choices, but he always ends up on top. But he also always has sort of a sense of what the world should be like and who he wants to be in it. And nobody else can ever see how this is going to work. My favorite story about Tijan, he's a pig farmer, the son of a pig farmer, and he ends up marrying the princess. And it's like, but when you tell kids those stories, this is somebody who doesn't follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was always careful. I never told stories. I didn't tell Jack and the Beanstalk to kids because I wouldn't tell them stories about people who lied and were malicious to get what they wanted. But certainly unorthodox, and certainly I think it's good for kids to hear you can make some dumb choices and still end up okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's good for adults too. Made a bad choice. Okay, so today is another day. You can make a different choice.
And sometimes the dumb choices are the ones that pay off because you made them on the basis of, and then it depends on what you believe, but in the very least, on the basis of your brain processing faster than your conscious mind, seeing a pattern or an opportunity before you consciously realized what it was. And so sometimes you make a bad choice and it works out. And sometimes you say, I'll try this NLP thing for 2 years. Because that's how long you should try a new business. And either it'll work or I'll go do something else. In 18 years, you're still there, still going. It's not a good business, but it is a great learning community. It is a great, engaging thing to be involved in. It turned out I wasn't that serious about the business part. I was more serious about the
growth.
How can I get people to learn? How can I get people to improve the way they use language? Not be scared of language? Not treat, like a lot of people treat language like it's kind of out there and it's scary and they don't really want to think about it. How can I just make people comfortable enough to connect better through language with themselves, with ideas, with other people? And it turned out this was a brilliant way of doing it and better than anything I'd found in post-secondary. So I'm still here.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, the time has flown. It's almost, we've been talking for almost an hour, but there is one quote that I'd like you to give us your take on. And it's a quote by Thomas King. And I remember hearing it the first time, and it was just like, for me, it was almost as though a door opened. But I want to see your take on it. That quote is, the truth about stories is that's all we are.
Yes. And it's from the Massey Lectures. There you go. There's my little footnote for it. The truth about stories is that's all we are. That's what we become. That's how we live. And in a way, it's 100% accurate. There's so many things that are in wisdom traditions that eventually you get the science to go with it. And the truth of your identity is it's not this thing or that thing, but it's connections. It's these webs of connections that connect you with other people, that connect past with the future. And the way that shows up in language is stories. When we tell a story or listen to a story, we take those patterns in and then we live them out.
Yes.
Sometimes for good, sometimes for not so good.
Yeah.
Thomas King's children's books are about Coyote. I've often felt that many mainstream white religions are missing a Coyote, because Coyote explains a lot about the world. Coyote is well-meaning, but he always gets things a little bit wrong. And that in stories is so enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm cautious about telling any Coyote stories at NLP Canada. I did that early and Coyote kept showing up. So it was a little disruptive. I don't think we can get much more disrupted now. So maybe it's our time for Coyote. But to go back to the quote, when we try to analyze things, we make everything all nice and neat. But a good story is never all nice and neat. If there's no surprise, there's not as much joy. And yeah, I think I would end there. And I think Thomas King wouldn't entirely disagree with me, although he is not effusive.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had a lot of, he's dealing with really difficult stuff in his stories. They're not conventionally joyful.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to him talk about his new book, which I've just bought. It's called Sufferance. And one of the characters goes to live in the ruins of a residential school and apparently spends his days removing all the crosses and replacing them with river rocks engraved with the names of the children buried there.
Wow.
And to have processed that, to have taken what happened and turned it into just that little bit of story. Yeah, if that's all I achieved in my lifetime, I'd be okay with that. I think that's worth it because there's so much encapsulated into that little bit. I haven't even read the book yet. I trust him. I've read his other books.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I hear there's so much more to what you're saying than I've perceived when I first read that quote. And for me, it was all about the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell others in order to suit ourselves. So whichever way, it's always there's a story behind everything you say, everything you do, whether you're aware of it or not. And by checking back, that's how you start exploring what does that really mean. So
And also sometimes people tell us better stories about ourselves than we've been willing to tell ourselves.
Yeah, because we only see one side, the side we don't like. We don't see those other elements.
A lot of coaching begins with somebody saying, I suffered, and the coach saying, you survived.
Yep. Perspective.
Right?
It's all about perspective.
But it's a really different story.
Yeah. Yeah. One, you're a victim. In the other one, you're a thriver. You grow stronger. Oh, yeah. Totally with you on that.
Pain doesn't minimize anything, but wow, right?
Different lens. So
now we've
time
just done a ton of reframing. So I didn't do an exercise formally, but you got me to tell stories and work people through some changes and give some ideas. And they can always visit us at NLP Canada for some free events or pick up a book, which is full of exercises because it's all about finding ways to get people to do something so they learn, not to just think something, which makes it hard to learn.
I love it. And thank you very much for being there, for accepting to be on this platform. If there was one key message you would want to leave with our audience, what would that be?
You get what you look for, so look for the good in yourself, in other people. Don't be blind to the other stuff. But it's amazing how much good comes out of looking at somebody and looking at their strengths and then bringing that strength out in you so they see it too. And I think, yeah, that's my final word for you.
That is precious. And I would say any parent out there, that would be something also for you to pay attention to. It's not always easy, but look out for the best. And you'll be surprised. You might discover things that you've never noticed before because you were so hung up on what they haven't achieved yet or what they are not showing up as, whichever way, which is still about you more than it is about them.
Or what you're scared of. I guess I'm kinder
Yes.
to parents. I feel that they are seeing what they're scared of, and they're
Yeah.
and it's easy to be terrified. But when people talk about what kind of body do you want and all these, I want to have the body of a 2-year-old. I love when you watch a toddler because they have so much more control than they've ever had before. And they are all that in a bag of chips. And I'm like, that's how I want to feel.
I love it because I have a 2-year-old toddler, and that's it. And it feels like there is no fear whatsoever. We're running after her, trying to get her out of problems, out of challenges, out of danger. And sometimes it feels like she narrow almost every single time, narrowly miss the fear we have, and she's still smiling and enjoying while we're there heart beating and thinking, oh my god. Yeah. Thank you. I love that. Maybe I should think more like my grandchild rather than the grandparent watching over the child. Anyway, it's been a pleasure, as usual, having a conversation with you. And
And
I feel
likewise,
blessed.
me too. Thank you.
So, this is it for tonight. And hope you enjoyed it. And whenever you want, come back for more. Bye bye.